Occupied France, August 1943. At a desolate Luftwaffe airfield, shortly after 400 hours, Oberleutnant Vera Schultz, Chief Technical Officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, received intelligence that should have heralded a significant victory. An American P-47 Thunderbolt had been forced down, its pilot apprehended, and the aircraft itself recovered largely intact. This was an intelligence windfall of immense value. For months, German aviators had engaged this colossal American fighter, reporting performance capabilities that seemed beyond belief. Now, German engineers would have the unprecedented opportunity to scrutinize one up close. Upon observing the P-47 resting on the tarmac, Schultz's initial impression mirrored that of every pilot who had encountered it. It appeared monstrous, an absurdly stout and clumsy aerial milk bottle. However, as he commenced his meticulous evaluation of the adversary's machine, the engineer, a man who placed his faith in quantifiable data, was poised to unearth a grim reality. The P-47 was not grotesque, it was a harbinger, and its constituent parts served as mathematical evidence that Germany had already forfeited a conflict its leadership was oblivious to. Schultz was not a combat pilot. He was an aeronautical engineer formerly employed by Messerschmitt prior to the war. His role involved dissecting enemy aircraft, identifying vulnerabilities, and devising strategic countermeasures. Upon arriving at the airfield and beholding the P-47 for the first time, his immediate reaction was identical to that of his fellow German pilots. The machine was unappealing, excessively bulky, and ungainly. Its fuselage was gargantuan, designed to accommodate a massive radial engine. The aircraft tipped the scales at nearly 8 tons when fully laden. For comparative purposes, the Focke-Wulf 190, Germany's primary frontline fighter, weighed approximately 4 tons. German pilots had affectionately, or perhaps mockingly, dubbed it the flying beer bottle. Gazing at it stationary on the tarmac, Schultz grasped the rationale behind the nickname. It seemed ill-suited for flight. Yet Schultz was a man of science. Aesthetics held little sway with him. His concern was its performance, and as his examination began, what he discovered would profoundly shake him. Schultz's investigation commenced with the machine's core, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. As his team removed the engine cowling, a hushed silence fell upon them for a considerable duration. The engine was immense, featuring 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 9, forming a radial configuration that accounted for the P-47's substantial girth. However, it was not merely its size that astonished Schultz, but its impeccable craftsmanship, its exacting precision, and its sophisticated engineering. Every single component was manufactured to tolerances that German factories were finding increasingly difficult to achieve. The cylinders were uniform, perfectly balanced. The crankshaft was a triumph of metallurgical expertise. Schultz retrieved his notepad and began his calculations. Based on its displacement and design, this engine was generating a minimum of 2,000 horsepower, likely more, considering the turbo-supercharger system he observed integrated within the fuselage. In contrast, the BMW 81 radial engine, which powered the Focke-Wulf 190, produced approximately 1,700 horsepower at its maximum output, and this represented the zenith of German engine technology. The Americans were mass-producing engines with 20 to 30% greater power, and doing so with apparent ease. The situation, however, deteriorated significantly. Schultz meticulously inspected the engine's construction for any indications of cost-saving modifications, the kind of compromises German factories were increasingly compelled to implement: inferior materials, simplified manufacturing processes, any measure to conserve resources. He found none. This engine was constructed from high-grade aluminum alloys and precision bearings, components that bore no evidence of material scarcity or manufacturing expediency. It was built correctly, not hastily. One of Schultz's assistants, a mechanic with years of experience working on German aircraft, gestured towards the cylinders. "Herr Oberleutnant," she remarked, "look at this. Each cylinder can be removed individually. Should one become damaged, you can replace just that part without dismantling the entire engine." Schultz nodded slowly, recognizing the brilliance of the design. It implied expedited repairs, reduced downtime, and a greater number of operational aircraft. German engines necessitated extensive disassembly for major overhauls. This American design presupposed frequent maintenance and emphasized efficiency. Yet another feature captured Schultz's attention, something that instilled a chilling premonition. The true secret behind the P-47's exceptional performance lay not solely in its engine, but in its turbo-supercharger system. Schultz had encountered intelligence reports pertaining to this technology, but witnessing it firsthand was a different experience. An intricate network of conduits snaked from the engine, traversing the fuselage to a turbine located at the aircraft's rear. This system ingeniously utilized the engine's exhaust gases to propel a compressor at speeds exceeding 20,000 revolutions per minute, forcing pressurized air back into the engine. The engineering involved was awe-inspiring. Exhaust gases needed to be routed through ducting capable of withstanding extreme temperatures. The turbine had to rotate at velocities that would shatter lesser bearings. The entire assembly required precise calibration to prevent engine damage. German engineers had experimented with turbo-superchargers, but had never successfully deployed one in operational service. The technical hurdles were too substantial, the necessary materials too scarce, and the manufacturing processes too intricate. Yet here it was, integrated into an American fighter that was being produced in mass quantities, not a prototype, not an experimental model, but a production aircraft, one of hundreds, perhaps thousands. Schultz performed the calculations pertaining to this turbo-supercharger. The P-47's engine could sustain full power at altitudes where German fighters struggled for breath. Above 25,000 feet, the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt 109 experienced a significant performance decline as their mechanical superchargers faltered in the rarefied air. Conversely, the P-47 would achieve its optimal performance, becoming fast, powerful, and utterly dominant in the high-altitude domain where German fighters were compelled to operate to intercept bomber formations. His assistant posed the inevitable question: can we replicate this system? "Herr Oberleutnant," Schultz shook his head, "not with our current manufacturing capabilities. This system demands precision machining, high-grade steel alloys, and thousands of man-hours of skilled labor. We are already struggling to produce sufficient basic aircraft." He paused. "Adding this level of complexity is beyond our capacity." The realization was crushing. The Americans had not merely constructed a superior fighter, they had engineered an aircraft that embodied an industrial sophistication Germany could not match. Following his examination of the engine, Schultz turned his attention to the airframe itself, discovering equally disquieting revelations. The P-47 had sustained considerable combat damage. Cannon shells had ripped through sections of the fuselage, and machine gun fire had riddled the wings. Nevertheless, the aircraft had managed to return and execute a controlled landing. Schultz analyzed the damage patterns. Multiple 20-millimeter cannon impacts, the kind that would typically obliterate a German fighter, had failed to bring down the P-47. Its robust structure had absorbed the hits. The heavy-gauge aluminum skin, the sturdy internal framework, and the redundant control systems all contributed to its remarkable resilience. He consulted damage reports from Luftwaffe units. Time and again, pilots recounted unleashing cannon fire upon P-47s only to witness, with disbelief, the American fighters continuing their flight. The reason was self-evident. The P-47 was constructed like a tank, whereas German fighters prioritized weight reduction and maneuverability. The P-47 was engineered to absorb punishment and remain operational. The cockpit armor was extensive, with thick steel plates shielding the pilot from multiple angles. The windscreen comprised armored glass, significantly thicker than that found in German fighters. Most crucially, however, the R-2800 radial engine acted as a formidable shield. Unlike the liquid-cooled inline engines of the Messerschmitt 109 and Focke-Wulf 190, the radial engine possessed no vulnerable coolant system. It could sustain fire through several cylinders and continue functioning. Schultz found documentation detailing P-47s that had returned to base with multiple cylinders destroyed, fuel tanks punctured, and control surfaces shot away. German fighters sustaining comparable damage would have undoubtedly crashed. One of his engineers observed, "It is over-engineered. They have incorporated weight for durability that could have been allocated to performance." Schultz concurred. "Indeed, but they can afford to. They possess engines powerful enough to compensate for the additional weight. We cannot. We are compelled to optimize for weight due to our engine power deficit." This represented a fundamental divergence in design philosophy. Germany produced aircraft at the very limits of technical possibility, extracting every ounce of performance from constrained resources. America, conversely, manufactured aircraft with substantial safety margins, mitigating any inefficiencies through sheer power. And, brutally, the American approach proved more effective. Schultz then examined the P-47's armament. It was equipped with 8 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing. His heart sank as he calculated the implications. Each gun carried approximately 400 rounds of ammunition, totaling 3,200 rounds. The combined rate of fire from all 8 guns exceeded 100 rounds per second. The firepower was devastating. A single second burst would unleash 100 heavy projectiles onto a target. A 2-second burst, typical for a firing pass, would deliver 200 rounds. German fighters typically carried 2 or 4 machine guns, supplemented by 1 or 2 cannons. Their overall firepower was less potent, and their ammunition capacity more limited. A Messerschmitt 109 might carry 60 rounds for its cannon and 500 for its machine guns. Once expended, the pilot had to return to base. A P-47 pilot could maintain sustained fire for approximately 30 seconds, translating into multiple extended bursts across several engagements before depleting their ammunition. Furthermore, it was not merely the quantity, but also the quality. Schultz examined the .50 caliber rounds themselves. They were substantial, high-velocity projectiles capable of penetrating armor and structural components with ease. He recalled pilot reports describing the effect of P-47 fire as a wall of lead. Now he understood why. With 8 guns converging on a central focal point, any target within that cone of fire would be utterly shredded. German aircraft, with their lightweight construction and limited armor, would disintegrate under such a formidable onslaught. A P-47 did not require pinpoint accuracy. It simply needed to bring the target generally into its forward arc and engage the trigger. Schultz made notes. Recommendation: avoid head-on engagements with the P-47. The probability of surviving return fire is minimal. As Schultz compiled his technical report, a pervasive pattern began to emerge, extending beyond any single component. Every system on the P-47 bore testament to an astonishing underlying industrial capacity. The engine necessitated precision machining and high-grade alloys. The turbo-supercharger demanded advanced metallurgy and manufacturing expertise. The airframe required vast quantities of aluminum. The armament depended on a functioning ammunition production industry. Any one of these components would have strained German industry. The P-47, however, integrated all of them into a single aircraft, and it was being mass-produced. Schultz requested production figures from intelligence sources. What he learned was soul-crushing. Republic Aviation was manufacturing P-47s at a seemingly impossible rate. By late 1943, they were producing over 500 aircraft per month. Plans were in place to increase production to 600, 700, even 800 per month by 1944. For comparative purposes, German factories were struggling to produce a combined total of 300 to 400 single-engine fighters per month across all models. And German production was perpetually disrupted by Allied bombing raids. However, the figures worsened. The R-2800 engine was not exclusively used in the P-47. It powered multiple American aircraft types. The total production of R-2800 engines would exceed 125,000 units throughout the war. Over 125,000 of these 2,000 horsepower engines. Germany's entire output of aircraft engines for all types throughout the entire war would approximate 250,000 units, the majority of which were significantly less powerful. The Americans were producing more of a single advanced engine model than Germany could produce in total engines. The disparity was incomprehensible. Schultz sat at his desk, poring over the numbers. He reran the calculations, convinced he must have made an error, but the figures remained unchanged. American aircraft production for 1943 was projected to surpass 85,000 aircraft. German production would be around 25,000, a ratio exceeding 3 to 1. But the situation was even more dire because American aircraft were, on average, heavier and more complex. A single B-17 bomber required more aluminum and man-hours than 3 Messerschmitt 109 fighters. The Americans were producing thousands of B-17s. The material disparity was overwhelming. The United States was engaged in a global conflict, supplying the Soviets with thousands of aircraft and tanks, equipping British forces, and yet still outproducing Germany in every category. Schultz's final report was scheduled for presentation to High Command in Berlin. As he compiled his findings, he understood he was drafting a document of considerable peril. The report meticulously documented the P-47's technical superiority across numerous domains. It candidly acknowledged Germany's insufficient industrial capacity to produce equivalent systems and contained a conclusion that would undoubtedly be perceived as defeatist. His summary read, "The P-47 Thunderbolt embodies a level of industrial and technological sophistication that surpasses Germany's current capabilities. Its widespread deployment indicates that American production capacity significantly exceeds prior intelligence estimations. Recommendation: implement tactical adjustments to minimize engagements with the P-47 at high altitudes. Strategic assessment indicates that continued attrition against numerically and technically superior enemy aircraft will result in unsustainable losses." In essence, his report stated, "We cannot prevail against this, and if we persist in the current manner of fighting, we will be annihilated." Schultz's commanding officer reviewed the report, regarding him with a blend of respect and apprehension. "You realize this will not be well received in Berlin," he stated. "They are unwilling to concede that American aircraft are superior. Should I alter the findings?" Schultz inquired, already knowing the answer. "No, the report is accurate. However, prepare yourself. The leadership does not respond favorably to uncomfortable truths." The report was forwarded up the chain of command. Schultz never received an official response, but he learned through informal channels that it had been dismissed as overly pessimistic. One staff officer was reportedly quoted as saying, "This engineer has been demoralized by enemy propaganda. The P-47 is crude American engineering inferior to our designs." Schultz was not surprised. He had witnessed this pattern before. Intelligence that contradicted Nazi ideology was rejected, regardless of its veracity. For Schultz personally, however, the examination of the P-47 had been an eye-opening experience, not just concerning the aircraft, but the war itself. In the months following his report, Schultz observed his predictions materialize. P-47s appeared in ever-increasing numbers over Europe. German fighter losses escalated. Experienced pilots were shot down and not replaced. The tactical recommendations he had made, such as avoiding high-altitude engagements and employing hit-and-run tactics, were gradually adopted. But by then, it was too late. The Americans had achieved air superiority through sheer overwhelming numbers and technological advantage. Schultz examined other captured American aircraft. Each one conveyed the same narrative: superior materials, sophisticated systems, evidence of an industrial base operating at a scale Germany could not possibly match. He observed a captured C-47 transport aircraft. It was one of over 10,000 that would eventually be produced. Germany's entire transport fleet consisted of a few hundred aircraft, predominantly obsolete designs. He then examined a P-51 Mustang. This aircraft combined the range of the P-47 with even superior performance. Its engine was a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin, manufactured under license in America. Thousands of these engines were produced. Every aircraft he inspected reinforced the same inescapable conclusion: Germany was losing an industrial war to an adversary possessing overwhelming material superiority. What troubled Schultz most was the availability of this critical information. The intelligence existed. German agents were diligently reporting on American production levels. Captured equipment provided irrefutable proof of quality. Yet, the leadership refused to acknowledge it. Or, more accurately, they acknowledged it, but clung to the belief that German willpower and superior tactics could overcome any material disadvantage. Schultz had been trained as an engineer. He believed in numbers, in mathematics, in empirical reality, and the stark physical reality was undeniable. Germany was being overwhelmed by an avalanche of American steel. Following the war, when production figures were declassified, Schultz's estimates were proven to be conservative. He had, in fact, underestimated American capacity. Total American aircraft production from 1940 to 1945 exceeded 300,000 aircraft. German production during the same period approximated 94,000. The United States alone produced over 15,600 P-47 Thunderbolts, a number greater than the combined total of German Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 1s produced. The R-2800 engine that Schultz had so meticulously examined with awe in 1943. Over 125,000 were manufactured not only by Pratt and Whitney, but also by Ford, Chevrolet, and other automotive companies that had been converted to wartime production. The industrial mobilization that generated these figures was unprecedented in human history. American factories that had previously manufactured automobiles were retooled to produce aircraft engines. Shipyards that had built cargo vessels began constructing aircraft carriers, and it wasn't merely a matter of quantity, the quality remained exceptionally high. Late-war American aircraft exhibited no signs of declining standards, no shortcuts taken, no compromises necessitated by material shortages. German aircraft, conversely, increasingly displayed evidence of resource constraints, lower-grade materials, simplified construction, and quality control issues as experienced workers were conscripted and replaced by forced labor. Schultz survived the war and was subsequently interrogated by American technical intelligence officers. They expressed particular interest in his 1943 report on the P-47. "Did you truly conclude from examining a single aircraft that Germany would lose the war?" an American officer inquired. Schultz paused thoughtfully before responding. "I concluded that Germany could not win an industrial war against America. The P-47 was tangible evidence of a production capacity we could not replicate. Every component, every system, required resources and manufacturing capability that exceeded Germany's total capacity." "But you were just one engineer," the officer pressed. "Surely others reached the same conclusion." "Many did," Schultz replied. "But in the Third Reich, stating inconvenient truths was perilous. It was safer to remain silent than to be accused of defeatism." The American officer nodded. "We found your report in captured German files. It was marked 'filed,' no action required." "Did that surprise you?" Schultz emitted a bitter laugh. "No, I expected it. The Nazi leadership did not seek intelligence. They sought validation of their pre-existing beliefs. When reality contradicted ideology, reality was dismissed." The story of Vera Schultz and the captured P-47 serves as a microcosm of Germany's strategic downfall. A trained engineer examined enemy equipment, arrived at an accurate assessment of Germany's industrial disadvantage, and was disregarded. His experience paralleled that of Admiral Canaris, who warned of American industrial capacity; Albert Speer, who understood Germany's inability to win a production war; Adolf Galland, who recognized the P-47's tactical superiority; and Sepp Dietrich, who knew the Ardennes offensive would fail due to a lack of fuel. In every instance, competent individuals perceived the truth, but were ensnared within a system where truth was subservient to ideology. They provided accurate assessments and were dismissed as defeatists or pessimists. The Nazi regime was founded on the premise that German racial and cultural supremacy would surmount any material disparity. They believed that willpower and determination held greater significance than industrial capacity, that ideology could triumph over mathematics. They were mistaken, and men like Schultz understood their error from the moment they examined the evidence. However, knowing the truth and possessing the capacity to act upon it are distinct matters. Schultz's report on the P-47 should have served as a critical wake-up call. This event ought to have prompted a complete re-evaluation of Germany's geopolitical standing. Instead, it was shelved and disregarded. The P-47 ultimately emerged as one of the most manufactured combat aircraft of the Second World War, with over 15,600 units produced. These formidable planes were responsible for the destruction of countless German planes, played a crucial role in the Allied invasion of Europe, and were instrumental in securing aerial dominance, a factor that sealed Germany's eventual downfall. The genesis of this pivotal development traces back to a single engineer scrutinizing a single seized aircraft, recognizing that his country had already forfeited a conflict they were unaware of engaging in. This wasn't a contest of military personnel or strategic maneuvers, but rather a struggle of manufacturing capabilities and raw materials. It was a conflict where the nation possessing superior quantities of oil, aluminum, steel, and industrial infrastructure was destined to prevail. The United States possessed these assets in profusion, while Germany lacked them entirely.